Welcome back to Senate Education on Tuesday, February 8th. Before we move to Ms. St. James and have her take us through the miscellaneous education bill, just want to spend 5 minutes comments on the direction that the state board has us moving in. If there's no objection, what I was going to do is have Ms. St. James put that into a new draft, really. There are a few areas that we would need to hammer out, to flush out, if you will. Maybe hear from the chief and others again, but Senator Chittenden.
The only comment, and I won't even call it a pause, but I remember very clearly Sue Siglowski and others cautioning this body to create any more work for our schools and our school boards. And so with that timeline, I don't know if that's characterized as aggressive, but I'd love at some point to hear from them with if this moves forward, as this moves forward, if that timeline puts any undue pressure, and if we want to look at extending it out a year just to give everybody some more pandemic breathing room.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good reminder. Thank you for that. I did talk to Ms. Siglowski over the weekend, maybe yesterday, and I know she has a board meeting. I think Mr. Olson also mentioned it tomorrow night, so we're hoping to hear from Ms. Siglowski on Thursday or Friday on this issue and really the direction that the state board has outlined. Senator Perchlik, what do you think?
I like it. I think it's more likely to get us to where we want to be than rulemaking.
Yeah.
The schools don't have to do anything under Mr. Olson's proposal if nobody objects. It's only if somebody objects, then they'll have to defend. Or if they want to change it, then they'll have to submit it to it. But I'm still worried about that deadline to objecting, because if the deadline passes, well, you didn't know about it or whatever, there should be some way to object in the future. The consultation language I thought was good that you brought up. And then also Chief Stevens' point of that if it's your own culture, you can use your own culture's symbology and history.
He was a huge asset to this conversation. I'm glad we. Senator Terenzini, I know this is something you've raised concerns about. Can you tell us a little bit where you're at, what you're thinking? And I'll preface it with what I'm hoping to do again here is I just don't want this going on and on. I completely respect your position about getting it, sort of locally, some of this stuff happening, but fear that if we don't sort of push this a little bit, we're going to could be never ending. So with that, please.
Well, I just feel like one more time, and I think my respected colleagues know this, but I want to make it clear, and I think it's a sensitive issue because I come from Rutland County, right? I represent where sort of the epicenter of where this debate has come from in the last few years. My position on this has nothing to do with whether I'm for or against Raiders or Ravens or whatever the name is or whatever the mascot is. It is simply that I just believe that issues like this should remain local. And that, if we advance this legislation, we're once again taking more local control away and centralizing it in Montpelier. And I truly believe, with all due respect, I believe that there's a lot of times where we can't fix local problems by bringing it centralized to the capital. And so that's where I stand. I'm probably a no on whatever the committee decides to do, but that's sort of my stance right now.
No, I appreciate that. I just want to have an open conversation about all of it. Senator Hooker, actually, why don't I break up the Rutland crowd? Senator Lyons.
This is tough. I do think that the testimony that we just heard from the chief of Don Stevens, is very compelling about moving away from some of the names that currently exist. And I don't know that message gets out as in such a compelling way to the local level. So I also appreciate the need to keep decision-making local. But this one rises above that in a way. Can he go to every single school board where this discussion is happening? Or is there an umbrella of a set of principles for an umbrella that allows for the school board decision-making to go forward. So I'm leaning more toward what we just heard from the state board at this point, because I do think that there, at least in this state, the issue around our Native Americans and Abnakis is more centrally located to a lot of the decisions that would happen at the local level.
Okay. Thank you. Senator Hooker, how do you feel about moving in the direction that Mr. Olson and Ms. Samuelson put forward?
Well, I think Senator Lyons said a lot of what I would say. I too think that there are local issues that need to remain local, and the local school board or school community can make decisions on some things, but this is beyond local. It's even beyond the state. I mean, this is an issue that is being discussed all over the country because people are being offended by the use of their culture. And a lot of times, it's maybe totally innocent, but when you look at the history of some of the mascots, you realize that they have reason to be offended. So I like the idea of having the state board oversee this, and then the question of choosing a mascot that's an animal or a mythological creature or whatever can certainly be at the state. We're not saying that the state board has to tell you what your mascot is going to be, but there are certain parameters that you have to abide by. So.
Okay, so Ms. St. James, do you have enough information then to go on for a new draft?
I think so. I just want to be clear. Sorry,
just,
Alex.
just to.
Oh, sorry, please, Senator Hooker.
I'm sorry. Mr. Olson did say that I believe he said that he hadn't surveyed the whole board.
Correct. Correct. That is fair. And
I'm
so
wondering
we
what
a
would
little
happen
while
with the
and
language.
hear back from them, and also I do have an appropriation for Rutland Town that I'll likely put in this to get one more vote out of committee, and see what happens. Just for $1 million and repaving. Can I get your exact address, Senator Tanzini? But seriously, Ms. St. James, any questions?
I do. I just want to clarify a couple things to make sure I understand where the committee is going. So the state board proposal, as I see it, has kind of two components. There's law that would be on the books that defines what an acceptable mascot would be, some sort of parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And then there would be this, so that would be in place forever. Well, until someone changes it in the future. But that would be on the books. That would be not subject to a transition period. There would be a transition period, which is, I believe, the process that Mr. Olson laid out. But there would still be some sort of statutory guidelines for the state for citizens who are looking to petition, and then the state board to take into consideration. Is that how you all understand it?
I think generally, yes.
Okay.
I may try to make a little bit, as we dig into this a little bit more, we might want to, back to the timeline piece that everyone's raising. I don't know, in terms of putting language in statute, in terms of defining mascots, there's something there that's just not quite feeling right to me. And so is there a way to rework, I'm not sure, but there's something, and maybe I'm just the only one, but it's a little unsettling there. I don't know if there's another way to deal with this, Ms. St. James.
So I think there could be one way to get us to the first draft that you can then pick apart. Would you be comfortable with me reaching out to Mr. Olson to work on this first draft? Okay. And then,
Absolutely.
okay.
Please feel free to.
Okay, then I'll do that. The other thing is I just want to make a plug for, I think when we met last week, I prepared, and we didn't have time to look at it, but I prepared a non-exhaustive list of what other states have done in this area that's on your website with hot links to all of the, both the laws and the current legislation that's being considered in Massachusetts, New York, and New Hampshire right now. And a lot of that legislation addresses some of the issues that came up today, such as transitional funding for like uniforms, school logos, as well as carve outs for agreements with Native American tribes to use names or images, as well as schools on tribal land. So a lot of the schools or a lot of the states on the West Coast, there were carve outs for tribal schools. So just as food for thought, it's all in one easy place as the committee goes forward.
Okay. Appreciate that very much. But yes, I think moving in the direction of this new draft and for you to work directly with Mr. Olson and raise some of these questions would be great. It just, for some reason, I may be the only one, putting in statute what an acceptable mascot is just doesn't feel right. You know, it just is something. So anyhow, but you may be able to find a better way to do it. Okay, yeah, Senator Chinnan.
If you're dangling $1 million appropriations for support of this bill, my support's starting to waver a little bit, Senator Campion. So
I wish I had that kind of power. It's like a look into what I imagine might be happen in DC. You know, Terenzini would then shoot back and say, I'm not going to vote. You know, it'd be just like this back and forth. Yeah. All right. Senator Terenzini.
I was just going to say you'll be in DC soon enough, so you can let us know how it works down there.
Yeah, right. Forget it.
So.
Yeah, on a family vacation. Okay, great. So, Ms. St. James, would you mind taking us through the bill itself? This is the miscellaneous ed bill, kind of a high overview, if you will, before we have our guests weigh in, knowing that we do have chairs meeting at 4, and I want to give folks be able to wrap up a little early.
Understood, and I'm sorry, I should have said Beth St. James, Legislative Counsel for the record.
Oh, no problem.
So a judge would have been very upset with me.
Oh.
So what you have before you today is a strike all amendment to the committee bill. So you drafted a committee bill, it was introduced and then recommitted back to your committee. And so to move forward and add and delete things, we're doing a strike all amendment. The first first four sections remain unchanged from what you voted out to begin with. And so the first section is the determination of residency for tuition purposes for the Community College of Vermont, creating a carve-out exception for the 1-year residency requirement for in-state tuition for people who are in Vermont who qualify under the federal definition of refugee. As a reminder, there has been discussion about expanding that definition to include more people for now. That's the language in this bill. Moving on to page 2, section 2. This is an amendment to section 1162 in Title 16, which is the suspension or expulsion of students. If you scroll down to page 3, subsection D, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this chapter, a student enrolled in a public school, and then the new language is approved independent school or pre-qualified private kindergarten program, who is under 8 years of age shall not be suspended or expelled from the school. D was added last session, and this bill contemplates expanding the prohibition on expelling or suspending students under the age of 8 to approved independent schools and pre-qualified pre-kindergarten program. There was discussion the last time you heard testimony on this bill from, I believe, the Independent Schools Association regarding the use of the word enrolled or attendance. I've kept that the same in this draft. There is, I have been unable to find a definition of enrolled or attendance in Title 16. I have looked through quite a bit of the state board rules. The terms seem to be used slightly differently depending on which section of Title 16 you are in or which state board rule you are in. Here, I would say you are in the attendance section of Title 16. And they, for example, in a, let's see. For example, if you, for truancy purposes, so absenteeism from school, the law says, so section 1122, which is in the same chapter as this statute, is it requires children over the age of 16 who are enrolled in public school, that they must attend public school or risk being truant. So there is a slight difference there. So it does appear that to attend public school, you do have to sign up. I think that varies by district, what paperwork you fill out and whether for transfers you're required to fill out paperwork or whether it's a school to school, but there is some sort of enrollment process. So I would say that enrolled is the most, is the broadest term. It would encompass attendance, but there are other areas of the law, for instance, harassment, hazing, and bullying definitions. Catch all, everyone defines a student as any person who is registered in or in attendance at an educational institution or has been accepted for admission. So that would be a very broad way to encompass everyone that might be attending an independent school or a public school. Approved independent school was also brought up for discussion last time we met. I have again left it the same. There is no current statutory change to the definition of approved independent school. There was discussion from the Independent School Association about the rulemaking that's going on related to Act 173, which is special education, and the differentiation between approved independent schools and approved independent schools that are accepting public tuition. I believe that that is a distinction related to special education funding. And so there's nothing in state law currently that would prohibit you from applying this prohibition to all approved independent schools. And I would say that the statutes on either side of this statute apply to just broadly all approved independent schools. So you could limit it or you could leave it as broad as it is. It's really a policy decision, but I don't see any legal hurdles there. The next section, we're still on page 3, section 3, is asking the Agency of Education to write a report regarding the impact of standardizing the entrance age threshold for public school kindergarten and to consult with certain organizations in the writing of that report and to recommend legislative action. Page 4, section 4 is another report required of the Agency of Education to issue a report on the impact of creating a statewide uniform school calendar. And then the newest addition to this bill is section 5, and that is requiring the Agency of Education in consultation with the State Board of Education to issue a written report to the Senate and House Committees on Education with recommendations for a statewide remote learning policy that incorporates remote learning into the requirements for student attendance, school days, and cumulative instructional hours. The report shall define remote learning and recommend statewide quality standards to ensure substantially equal access to quality basic education and recommend any legislative action.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That was terrific. Not seeing any questions. We can go into our witnesses unless people have questions or immediate comments at this point. Okay, why don't we start, Mr. St. James, thanks very much. Let's see, I believe, is it you, Mr. Fannin, who's up first?
I believe so, yeah, let me turn my volume here.
Okay, great. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Senate Education Committee. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about S-283. I'm sorry I didn't listen to Beth St. James entirely. I was a little bit occupied and I wanted to, and I apologize. I will catch up on that. But before I begin, I wanted to just make sure that you got my February 2nd memo about loan forgiveness proposal there. Still working with VSAC. I think we'll need to, as they'll be in the mix. And but certainly the student loan issue is significant. It's crushing to people, and anything we can do to alleviate that would be appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Did you sent that to Daphne?
I did on,
Okay.
I think I was dated the 2nd. I think I sent it the 2nd.
All right, I'm just a little, okay, terrific. Thank you very much.
Okay, I can send it again.
Nope.
And happy to do so and make sure that you have it. So let me know and I'll check in with Daphne afterwards. As to S-283, the miscellaneous ed bill, my comments are rather brief in written testimony here. Vermont EA supports the state's efforts to assist refugees. And this seems like a modest step towards that goal. We support it. So thank you. It's a good effort. Suspension or expulsion of students. This issue has been around for some time. And like others, I know certainly Vermont EA believes that entities that receive education fund dollars should be held to the same standards as do public schools in this regard, including around their discipline rules. Students with disabilities tend to suffer the greatest forms of discipline because of their disabilities. And rules protecting students should be applied to all students, regardless of the school they attend. This expanded language, I think VSBA points it out in its, I believe Beth St. James mentioned it. I was trying to listen and do two things at once. The language around expanded coverage, if you will, is supported, I think, by Act 35's, the Task Force on Equitable and Inclusive School Environments, their initial report. That task force examined issues of race, school suspension and expulsions, and other inclusive issues in the hopes of addressing systematic disciplinary issues found in our schools. So I think that too is perhaps should be expanded a little bit as VSBA suggests. I think that was a good suggestion in Sue Siglowski's testimony, and I guess you can talk with her about that or read her testimony, but I think that makes sense and should cover all students in the state of Vermont.
I apologize, Mr. Bennett. I too was just doing two things at once. So tell me again what you would like to see expanded.
I think it's probably a better question for Sue Siglowski, to be very honest with you. Her written testimony is, I believe, will say that approved independent schools or pre-qualified, I guess, pre-K programs. We just want to, I think the notion is people who are getting education fund dollars ought to be adhering to the same rules. So we ought not to be expelling kids under 8 under any circumstances. That's the general concept. As far as the standardized kindergarten entrance age report, we certainly would support the AOE examining this issue, and we would certainly work with the agency. So we support that. As to a statewide uniform school calendar report, I'm not exactly sure what problem is being addressed here, but we support the AOE examining the impact of a uniform statewide school calendar. Current law already requires a regional calendar approved by a majority of the superintendents in a tech center, and that's found at 16 VSA 1071E. This issue came up several years ago and has, I guess, periodically over the years. But perhaps a review of it is again in order. And I know Senator Hardy has been talking about the starting time of schools, and maybe that should be added to this issue as well. So you'd have a uniform school calendar and a start time issue. So I don't know if that's of interest to the committee, but I know that Senator Hardy has talked to a number of us about that issue.
So right now, Jeff, if I may interrupt. So right now, if you're in a district, that district is going to have a uniform calendar. So you're not going to have one kid at one elementary school. You know, I'm thinking particularly if you're a parent and finding sitters, finding day, all that kind of thing, or even want to travel. So within the district, it's uniform.
It's supposed to be in what I would call the CTE catchment area. So
Yeah,
you can't have more than one. The law is written such that if you're the superintendents, by majority vote of the superintendents, are supposed to develop a regional calendar.
Yeah.
It's designed to make sure that, among other reasons, I'm sure, to make sure that students that go to a regional tech center
Mm-hmm.
don't find themselves on two different vacation schedules, in other words.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And so they don't end up not going to school for 2 weeks in February, where they had 1 week off in their home high school and then another week off for the regional tech center or something, because it's at a different thing. The design there is to make sure that there's a regional calendar. So I think in answer to your question about a parent who might have a student in an elementary school and a middle school, that should be all in the same catchment area.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Yeah, yeah. Okay, but this is good. And then you don't need to represent Senator Hardy on this, but I'm assuming and this is something for Ms. St. James, if you're there, maybe put some kind of note around the start date of school. I think taking a look at that makes good sense.
Start time, I believe.
Oh, start time. So it's
Time.
Right.
Okay.
Senator Hardy has talked to several of us about starting older kids a little bit later and younger kids a little bit earlier. And so that it's been a conversation over the many years. She's raised it with us, a few of us. And if you're asking the AOE to look at a uniform school calendar,
Mm-hmm.
it might be the opportune moment to also examine the start time of schools.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, it could be interesting. I'm curious. I do recall there being some research out there that she may have even shared with me at one point that seems like it could make a difference in terms of actual learning. Senator Perchlik, you were probably overlapped with Senator Hardy when she talked about this issue in committee.
I think she had a bill on it. I think we took it up. We at least heard her present the bill in committee a couple of years ago. So she talked about it and about that research, but we didn't move it, I don't think.
Okay.
Or it might have been
Okay. So we'll leave a placeholder there, Ms. St. James, for us to go back and see if we can find some language. Sounds like an interesting issue worth considering. Mr. Fannin.
And lastly, Section 5, the remote learning report. I haven't had much time to look at that, but certainly we've learned a lot over the last 3 school years about remote learning and the value of it, and probably raised more questions than we've answered. And as we think we should review remote learning and remote delivery of teaching and all of that that's occurred over the last few years, and would support the AOE in its efforts to examine that. I think it's a worthy endeavor. We want to get the standards. We want to make sure that the standards are high, whether it's delivered in person or remotely. We know that having a high quality teacher in front of every classroom is key to a student's success. But we are, the last 2 years, have taught us that we may be in situations where we may need to switch to remote for other reasons, and we got to get it right.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Fannin? Comments? Concerns? Okay. Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. And I think the only thing we're going to probably have you just think a little bit more about, appreciate the loan forgiveness piece, just continuing this conversation around, and we'll have Secretary French in also, because I guess he's got some group working on, the teacher shortage issue, what we have and what's coming, and any partnership. We'll get some teachers in here also to say a few words in the next couple of weeks about what they would like specifically that would help them. So we've
absolutely, we're working with the Secretary of Ed on that as well. Okay. So we're part of that group.
Great. Okay. And are you guys meeting regularly, Jeff?
Every other week, there's a group of us, about 30 education folks who meet with the secretary and have been since early in the pandemic. Yep. We'll see where it goes.
Is there a time on it when I realize the pandemic has interrupted a lot of this work, but do you know when? Is there an expectation for a final report?
I apologize. Senator. There's two groups that the Secretary has been working with. First one is what I would call a COVID group that's been around since March, April of 2020. And that's a group of about 30. The subgroup, if you will, talking about teacher recruitment and retention, is more recent. I don't know that that's something that the Secretary asked a few of us to come to some meetings. I don't know what the regular schedule is. I have to admit, I don't know what he plans to do with our advice and counsel. You should ask him that. And we're certainly willing to meet with him and have been. And it's a worthy endeavor, but I don't know where he's going with it exactly.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Siglowski, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Good afternoon, everyone. Sue Siglowski, Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association, here to testify on S-283 and specifically on Section 2 of the bill is where I'm going to focus my testimony. VSBA supports equitable practices for all children, regardless of their educational setting. And we want to thank you very much for including in this bill an amendment to 16 VSA Section 1162, addressing the disparity that's currently in the law. That disparity was created by limiting the prohibition of suspension and expulsion for students under the age of 8 to only those students enrolled in public schools. So it didn't provide any protections for students under the age of 8 who are receiving their education in other settings. And you've addressed that in Section 2 of the bill. There's some, the added protections that you have included in Section 2, we believe could be enhanced by requiring approved independent schools and pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten programs to report all suspensions and expulsions to the Agency of Education as set out in language that I included in my written testimony. So I provided an idea for an extra sentence that you could add that would require that reporting to happen. And I would just add that the reporting requirement that we're suggesting is consistent with the recommendations that are in the initial report of the task force on equitable and inclusive school environments. That report was issued on February 3rd, so it's very new, but I included a link to that report in my written testimony, so you'll be able to take a look at it. I believe that recommendation is on page 22 of the report. As far as the other sections of the bill go, we don't have any objection to any of the other sections. And I guess would just note, I wasn't sure whether, I haven't heard the Agency of Education testify on it yet, so I wasn't sure about whether they had let you know about their capacity to do all of the work that is in those reports. But we don't have any objection to them.
No, I appreciate you raising that, and we've not yet heard from them. We probably will later this week or early next week. So thank you for that. Questions from Ms. Siglowski? Questions or comments? Anything else for us at this point, Ms. Siglowski?
No, thank you.
Okay, terrific. Mr. Francis.
Good afternoon, Jeff Francis from the Vermont Superintendents Association. Is my audio working okay?
Beautifully.
Okay. So I'm going to speak briefly about sections 2, 3, 4, and now 5. Section 2, the Superintendents Association does support adding approved independent schools and private pre-kindergarten programs to the education settings prohibited from expelling or suspending students under the age of 8, except in instances where those students pose imminent threat. With regard to 3, 4, and 5, or sorry, 3 and 4, our position is that we have no objection to the report or the recommendations. We would participate as is indicated in the bill. I wanted to make sure that I also spoke about the capacity, both at the agency and the field. And I took note of Senator Chittenden's comment where he raised that same point. I want to be consistent in our message, which is we should be tending to the essentials this year. And frankly, I don't know whether the entrance age threshold for public school kindergarten or a study of a statewide uniform school calendar rises to the level of recovery work, which is what the secretary wants to focus on. That stated, both of those topics are of general interest within the education community. And if the agency and secretary see fit to undertake those studies, hopefully in agreement with the General Assembly, then we'll gladly participate. But I can, from my vantage point, see the work mounting. I paid attention to the discussion of the mascot issue, and that if it comes to pass in a manner that Chair Olson was describing, there's work associated with that too. So I just want to be very mindful that this ought to be a year to do the essentials. I had not looked at the remote learning provision until Ms. St. James' presentation. That seems a little bit more important to me than either the kindergarten start time or the statewide uniform school calendar. So those are not too elegantly stated, but that's what my thinking is right now.
Senator Chittenden.
So thank you for that point, Jeff. I would just say I agree to some extent the academic calendar that it's hard to make the recovery connection. On the kindergarten piece, I would just say as a father of 3 kids during this pandemic, childcare has been a real factor. And so I can't imagine if my kids were still in childcare in that 4 or 5-year-old thing. And the kindergarten entrance age does have an impact on our childcare demands. So that's why I could make a connection there. And I would definitely take your point more for the academic calendar, less so for the kindergarten age.
Yeah, and if I might comment on that, I put in the testimony that in my role as executive director, issues around kindergarten entry age don't often come to my attention, but I did speak with the superintendent about it because I wanted to check in on my thinking, and the superintendent indicated to me that it can be problematic with the statute allowing for a local determination. I think it's between August 1 and December 31, that school districts find themselves fielding forms of requests for waivers to whatever age they establish. So I'll wrap this up by saying nobody should interpret my comments as being disagreeable on these points. I'm just trying to order the work.
Great. Yeah, and one of the things I know we're sort of talked about since the beginning of the session is, are there ways to do some work right now and put the dates out a little bit so it gives people the space and the time that they might need?
Right. I mean, the capacity at the AOE is an issue, right? So even some of the legislation that you passed last year that necessitated work groups or studies, I mean, I think both probably officially and unofficially that it's hard for the AOE to keep up in staffing those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we're going to look at the capacity. We've dug into it a little bit as it relates to some teacher supports around some academic work. But yeah, no, we recognize it, and we're hoping to at least try to push it with our friends in Approach to add some support in the agency.
Right. So those are my comments on that bill today, and I appreciate your hearing from me.
Mr. Nichols.
Good afternoon, committee. Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association, for the record. I'll just touch on each of the sections real quick and take any questions you might have. Section 1, although that doesn't affect us, I just think that's good work. I'm glad that your committee's thinking that way in terms of community colleges. In terms of suspension of expulsion of students, we agree on the approved independent or pre-qualified private pre-kindergarten program. It's the same old thing we all say, same dollars, same rules. They're all Vermont kids, so they should be treated the same. In terms of the standardizing kindergarten entrance age, I will reflect that like VSA, and I know Vermont NEA and VSBA feel this way as well. We are worried about adding extra laws and extra work to people, and we are worried about the capacity at the Agency of Education. In terms of Senator Chitnin's comments, I agree with those, and I've always thought we should have a uniform start age for kindergarten. One other factor in favor of that is that right now what will happen sometimes is parents will enroll kids in a school, a kindergarten, and then they'll move the kid to another kindergarten and say, well, my kid already started kindergarten. So if one school has a January 1st date, another one had a September 1st date, that can cause problems. So having it be the same date across the state definitely makes sense.
Great.
Uniform school calendar. I mentioned in my written testimony that several years ago when I was treasurer of the superintendents, we had a meeting where we talked about a uniform school calendar, and every single trustee across the state, we all said, oh, this is a great idea. And then we all talked about what the calendar is going to look like, and we all disagreed vehemently with each other. So everybody wants to have the same calendar. The problem is whose calendar is going to be and how's it going to be set up. So I fully support that. I was on a calendar committee several years ago, and I still have arrows in my back from going around the state talking about shortening summer vacation by a few weeks. And I would encourage the committee and the Agency of Education, if we're going to make a standardized calendar, let's look at it in terms of how it would have positive impact for kids and for academics as well, because too often we worry about what the impact is going to be on summer vacations and things like that. I think we should look at it a little bit more broadly. And this also goes even further to Senator Chitnin's point. And I heard Jeff Fannin talking about this a little bit, but one of the things right now is even though we have regional calendars, we only sort of do. So we have some tech centers that take students from lots of different places and their calendars can switch all the time. Exams might be on different days. So sometimes some tech center kids end up with 150 days of actual tech center experience instead of 175 they're supposed to have. It's been an issue for a long time. Secondly, if my district has a different vacation in your district and your spouse teaches in my district and vice versa, we have childcare problems right there where parents are working when their spouses are off, and when their parents are off, and vice versa. And by having one calendar, we don't even have the same February vacation right now or April vacations in the state. It's pretty silly in a state with only 80,000 kids. So I do hope that we can do something eventually, at least on the calendar, to make it more uniform.
If you don't mind me interrupting for just a second, Ms. St. James, just while we're on this point, Mr. Nichols, would you, Mr. Nichols' language around the calendar and improving academic work performance, it'd be great to incorporate that instead of just my idea of making certain everybody can have the week off at the same time. I think it's a good point, very good point. Thank you.
Okay.
Please continue.
And then I didn't see section 5 until literally 10 minutes ago. But I agree. I think that's an important issue. And if we're going to have any sense of remote learning, there needs to be standards for that, what that looks like and what that entails. If the Agency of Education has the capacity to do that, I can't think of a person better suited to do that work than Dan French. That's just a real strength of his. Yeah. But I also want to make sure that we don't put so much on his plate and the agency's plate that they can't get it done. But I do think it's important. And that concludes my comments, and my written testimony has been submitted to Daphne.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Nichols. That was great. Any questions or comments for Mr. Nichols? I think we're getting to a pretty good spot with this. We'll have the AOE in. We'll negotiate a little bit, see if maybe some date changes, etc. I do respect the conversation around capacity, and I think we also need to not just punt things, but make sure that they have capacity to do the work that needs to get done. So, all right. Anything else? Mr. Nichols, thanks a lot. All right, committee. Anything from any of you? Senator Perslick.
On the studies, I agreed with the comments about the workload of AOE, but I don't know how many different things we can get Jessica Careless to do. But I think if we do it, that it shouldn't just be a study, because I think that's what happens. I think the school calendar thing has been studied a lot.
Yeah.
To Nichols' point, and we don't need to study the impact. We need them to either do it or not do it, I think. So I think it needs more work than just studying the impact, but then you actually get something out of the work, not just another study, so to speak. So if a couple of those, I'd rather see to, it's like a yes or no question. Should we do it? And if yes, then just tell us what it should be. We wouldn't enact it till next year, but I'd like to see if we're going to make them do the work, that then we actually get something done out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I remember, I think it was former Speaker of the House, Ralph Wright, who was represented my district. Remember him, Cheryl, I'm sure, Senator Hooker. And this has been going on since he was Speaker, which is a long time ago, decades. And so hopefully, I agree, sort of analysis paralysis a little bit. Let's take this step. And maybe, Ms. St. James, if you're there, we could put language in there that, yes, please bring us back not only an analysis or more of an implementation plan. What's the plan? What does the calendar look like? When would it go into effect? I think that's a little bit better language. Does that feel okay, Senator Perslick, using that kind of? Okay. All right, so tomorrow we're jumping into a couple of different things just quickly. S-162, bargaining rights of teachers, and then returning, which will take a good part of the afternoon. And then 219, we have Jim Demaray and Peter Teachout coming in on those issues. So, okay, thanks. Feel like we're making progress. If you don't feel that way, give me a ring. Make some changes to committee membership. I see Terenzini got the memo. Today was his last day on committee. He was good though. He was really good while he was here. We'll do some kind of resolution for him at some point.